The media are freaking out right now about the Supreme Court's decision yesterday, 9-0, that states are not allowed to prevent voters from having Donald Trump on the ballot. You can't rig the ballots, the Supreme Court said yesterday. Here's the left's freak out, courtesy of Newsbusters.
We've learned that it was a 9-0 decision ruling that Donald Trump can be on the ballot in Colorado and other states.
I'm not confident that that will produce a result that's good for American democracy.
This is actually what I had been concerned about. I had been concerned that should it go to the Supreme Court, they would rule this way.
I'd laugh if it weren't so sad.
My next guest says Donald Trump is still an oath-breaking insurrectionist. Do you have confidence in the Supreme Court? Do you think this court is partisan?
The court itself may have overstepped.
The court went way further than it needed to go.
Our colleague Melissa Murray has called this Supreme Court the YOLO court.
The criticism of the court is that they're playing interference.
Not since Bush v. Gore have we seen a court that's had this many opportunities to interfere in the election.
The headline here is that this is a unanimous ruling, but if you scratch the surface just a little...
This is a 5-4 ruling on part of it.
Okay. Who knew that Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson were white supremacists? I had no idea. I'm glad I found out. The left very angry at them today. For more on this, let's bring in Carrie Severino. She's the president of the Judicial Crisis Network and the co-author of Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation, and the Future of the Supreme Court. Carrie, always nice to talk to you.
Great to talk to you, Vince.
So you get a 9-0 decision, and the left is angry and thinks the court is partisan on behalf of Donald Trump. Can you explain that?
Yeah, Elena Kagan, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Sotomayor had long been hiding their MAGA status, and now it's really just coming out in the open. And we've discovered that not just 6, but all 9 members of the Supreme Court are actually, crazy insurrectionist apologists. And it's almost like one of the quotes you had with, "It would be funny if it weren't so sad." You're like, oh my gosh, guys, you can't. It's so hard for them to accept that
yes.
There could be any ruling that could be about law and not about politics.
Well,
that's what it's about. Obviously, the 9 justices aren't going to vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
They just think what Colorado's doing is illegitimate.
Yeah, it's totally illegitimate. And anyone who was clear-eyed and sober and honest about this was projecting ahead that this is likely to be a 9-0 decision. But just to engage in a little bit of media commentary for a moment, there are people who've been substantially misled by some of these left-wing outlets into believing that this was some sort of close call. And here you have these news outlets trying to gently let them down. Oh, this is too bad. This is terrible. This is a partisan operation.
Yeah, and then they're trying to save face by being like, well, actually, it was really not 5-4. Okay, there are some differences of opinion in exactly which parts of the main opinion are necessary. But ironically, the concurrence that Justice Barrett has, the concurrence in the judgment, in fact, I would say are even stronger opinions for Trump, because they're saying you don't even need all of the analysis. It's so obvious. You just need like a half of the main opinion, and it's clear that Trump wins. And the number of different occasions that you could imagine that would fit in between the daylight between those opinions are very few circumstances. Donald Trump does not fall into them. It's not like, well, if you went with the concurrence in the judgment, then maybe Indiana and Maine could kick him off the ballot, but Colorado couldn't. No. What this opinion says is none of these, crazy ideas that are being floated to get Trump off the ballot, none of them are going to be successful 9-0.
So as I understand it, and you correct me if I'm wrong, all 9 justices agreed that it is not the job of the states to remove federal candidates, national candidates from the ballot. Is that right?
Yeah, and they all agreed this would they would lead to total chaos, which is kind of what people were gearing up for, right? You have one state he's on, one state he's off. That's nuts, and it's not the role of the states. And again, 9-0, all the justices agree with that.
And the divisions, insofar as they have any, were about what exactly Congress would have to do to disqualify a candidate. Is that true?
Well, I think no one really went into exactly what Congress would have to do, which is good. The court shouldn't go into that because that is not something that was presented to the court. This was, in fact, a very narrow decision. Short, it was narrow. The one example that Justice Sotomayor's separate opinion, concurrence in the judgment, identified is maybe, say the person who's your prosecutor had been an insurrectionist and therefore was invalidly in their office. Could you raise that as a defense I'm being prosecuted by someone who's invalidly in their position or somewhere in the system. I mean, this is just okay. You can imagine like a law school exam question where there's something like this is going to come up, but folks, that's not the situation we're seeing, and it's a vanishingly rare likelihood. So she kind of identified some quirky fact patterns that maybe the court is foreclosing and should have given more consideration to. I just think it's, to try to make a big deal out of that fine distinction between whether it's necessary to talk about Congress has to act or whether there might be a narrow range of things where in the middle of a lawsuit it could be determined as well. That's just that really out there.
But I'm seeing in all the media coverage, and even like, for instance, the Women of the View of all people were talking about it today, this idea that perhaps come January 6th of 2025, that Democrats, especially if they control the United States House of Representatives, they could stop a Trump presidency by declaring him an insurrectionist and saying it's Congress's power to exclude him. Is that possible?
Well, it is Congress's power to exclude him. I don't think you could do it with just a bare majority of the House of Representatives, but who knows? That's what the Supreme Court hasn't determined. I think it would be supremely ironic to have their own January 6th blocking attempt when we all know that this is what's going on at the base of this is just politics all the way down, and it's not that it doesn't have anything to do with a real argument. So maybe they can give that effort, and that's one of those things that we could wish the Supreme Court had clarified more. What is an insurrection, et cetera. But that's where they really were narrow. Just
right.
as the liberal justices said, don't decide more than you have to. They didn't decide more than they had to. They decided the issue that resolved it that was unanimous. And even though you probably have a strong majority of the court that also says, also, by the way, this is not the kind of thing that would qualify as an insurrection, supporting an insurrection. They didn't overstep. And I hope that scenario doesn't play out to test that.
Well, also, one of the other features that Trump's lawyers raised during the oral arguments is some dispute over whether or not the President of the United States is considered an officer of the United States and whether Section 3 of the 14th Amendment even really applies to him. The court kind of skipped over assessing that. Is that right?
Yeah. Again, they could have resolved it in a lot of different grounds, right? They could have said this wasn't an insurrection. They could have said he's not even covered by that phrase. But they decided the one. I suspect those other ones were harder questions, and maybe they didn't have as broad of a unanimity. And they said, let's decide this on the one point that is clearly unanimous, because if any of those points fall, then it's clear Trump can't be kicked off the ballot. So I think there probably are multiple ways that you could have gotten a majority of the court to say, yeah, he couldn't have for this reason, and this one, and this one, and this one, but they just went with the one that was unanimous because, as I said, this is ironically, they're getting yelled at for not having a narrow decision, which in fact, it was an incredibly narrow decision.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the court has a whole bunch of other decisions that directly involve Donald Trump's candidacy, or indirectly, for that matter, involve Donald Trump's candidacy, especially as they consider some of these prosecutions of January 6 defendants. Did yesterday's decision signal in any way the way they're going to handle any of these other Trump cases?
I don't think so. I mean, in terms of legal principles, they're not related. I think for people who worry that, is the court going to try to balance maybe a decision one way for one person and one way for another. There have been justices, and actually there's evidence that maybe in this case there could have been some vote trading with Justices Kagan and Sotomayor, and so maybe there are some justices in the court who will say, well, we ruled for him here, and that'll give us cover to rule against him there. That's the only way that they could possibly be connected. Legally, there's no connection, and obviously that's not the correct reason for a Supreme Court justice to make a decision. I hope that wasn't. That wasn't the reasoning that any or many of the justices were using. When
you say vote trading, why do you detect any semblance of that?
Well, what there has been reporting that unfortunately the Supreme Court didn't scrub the metadata terribly well in this opinion, and it turns out from what it looks like from the metadata, the original opinion wasn't a concurrence in the judgment, which means they agree with the result but not the reasoning, that it in fact was a partial dissent by Justice Sotomayor alone. And this is all very much speculation, but the speculation is that maybe in order to get her to make it a concurrence in the judgment, so the word dissent is nowhere in the opinion, that then Justices Kagan and Jackson said, well, we'll join you, but it's going to be a concurrence in the judgment so that it's a clear unanimous thing on such a hot button issue. And I have to applaud them for wanting that unanimity. I have to say, though, I don't think it's the right thing to, trade your, if that is what happened, I don't think it's the right thing to trade your votes around, say, I'll vote for something that I think isn't really legally maybe correct. Maybe they got her to adjust how her opinion was written so they could, in good faith, join it, though.
Right, yeah, the ethical thing
anyway.
would be just to give your opinion, whatever it might be. But I will say that it is nice to have a 9-0 decision because even if it were just one, if Elena Kagan had come out with a dissent, that would be the dissent on which the left hangs its hat today. And it would be cause for even more divisiveness in a country that definitely doesn't need anymore.
Yeah, and you can see by how they're treating this, again, concurrence in the judgment, agreement with the overall outcome of the case. They're treating it like it's a dissent. And to be honest, it reads a little bit like a dissent, probably because it started out that way. But people are trying to just emphasize the distinctions here rather than recognizing, despite Justice Barrett had a separate opinion, pleading like, guys, look, bottom line here is all 9 justices agree. That is the take-home message. But of course, if that's not the message that fits with your narrative, then that's not the message people are going to focus on.
Yeah, that's right. Carrie Severino, again, president of the Judicial Crisis Network. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate that.